My name's Bob. I am a sidelined employee working for a certain publishing company. This year, I'm hitting the big 40 and still haven't settled down. Now, that's not to say I've never had a girlfriend. I had one back in college. We met at a literary club, bonding over a shared love for a particular novelist, which led us to dating. After graduating, we stayed close since we worked near each other, and our relationship was as solid as ever. Never had a fight with her, and I used to think, I want us to always be this close, maybe even get married someday. Turns out, I was the only one thinking that. She started getting closer to a senior colleague at her job, and our meetings started becoming less frequent. By my second year in the workforce, she broke things off. A buddy of mine later told me that she had fallen for some handsome, high-flying executive at the IT firm she worked at. A guy whose looks and paycheck were leagues above mine. In the end, women choose men based on their looks and money. After losing my confidence, I never got a girlfriend again, and in fact, I've lived without even showing a hint of interest in women. However, I was liked by colleagues, and I was very satisfied with my relationships at work. Having left my previous job in my mid-20s and joined this company midway, it's been over a decade. Even though I'm not in a prominent position, covering for my junior colleagues when they make a mistake is a piece of cake. Sometimes, after work, I'd go out for drinks and listen to my colleagues' complaints, offering them advice, so they really relied on me. Then, one day, the day after I had helped cover up a mistake for a colleague, he ran up to me, exclaiming, "We've got news. Did you hear? We're getting a new employee from the headquarters, and it's a young woman at that." Seeing the colleague getting all excited about a young woman, I gently placed both my hands on his shoulders and said, "Easy there, calm down." Not long after he caught his breath, our boss walked into the office with the mentioned young woman. "Starting today, Catherine will be the manager of this division. I'm Catherine. Nice to meet all of you." As she greeted and gave a slight nod, a round of applause began, growing louder. In the midst of the clapping, the same junior colleague beside me whispered, "I heard Catherine used to be a department head at the headquarters." Hearing that, I thought to myself, impressive for someone so young. Later, my boss told me the same thing, confirming that the rumors were indeed true. With a track record of rising to a managerial position at such a young age, she worked even harder than the rumors suggested, swiftly handling tasks and showcasing her prowess. Even though she was younger, she became my superior. She was friendly and highly competent, quickly becoming a natural fit in our department. However, there was one thing that bugged me. I often felt her gaze from her distant desk. It wasn't a flirtatious look or a look of disdain, but something indescribable. At first, I thought she was puzzled by me, a middle-aged man still in a peripheral role. One day, after this had been going on for a few days, she approached my desk and asked if I could prepare a document for her by the next afternoon. Given how capable she was, I figured she could probably do it faster herself. However, once I understood the simple content she needed, I realized she must be so swamped with work due to her efficiency and decided to help. So, I said to her, "I can get this done today. I'll bring it over once it's ready," and turned back to my computer. But she didn't move. When I looked up, her mouth was agape, a look of shock on her face. "What's wrong?" I asked. She seemed to snap out of it and said, "Oh, nothing. Thank you," before finally heading back to her desk. Later that day, as promised, I submitted the completed document just before the end of work hours. She looked even more shocked than before, glancing back and forth between the document and me. I braced myself, thinking she might criticize me for not doing a good enough job. Amazing. Those were the first words she finally managed to utter. Then she continued, "Who exactly are you?" Apparently, what had taken her aback was the impeccable and advanced nature of my presentation. A younger colleague, looking quite curious after witnessing the scene, was about to approach when another colleague, sensing the tension between me and her, took the younger one's hand and said, "We'll be heading out now," and left the office. After seeing them off, I met her gaze and responded, "Just a sidelined employee, really?" But with a look of incomprehension, she blurted out, "Hey," as she looked up at me with a puzzled expression. She then said, "No offense, but this French document isn't just something you can merely translate. Even folks at our headquarters find it intricate, and yet you've compiled it so flawlessly. It's unbelievable." While she continued to alternate her gaze between the document and me in sheer astonishment, I explained, "In truth, I studied abroad for a year during college. I studied French like my life depended on it. Interacting with native speakers during that time boosted my proficiency even more." Hearing my explanation, her expression of shock remained unchanged. "I get that you know French, but this document contains information that isn't just French-based. For a typical employee, translating non-French parts takes time, but you've done it so quickly. Just how many languages can you comprehend?" I simply responded with, "About 5, stating only the fact." At my brief response, she looked even more startled, almost as if she'd seen a ghost. "I can't believe someone of your caliber isn't in a top position here or at the headquarters," she said, holding her head in disbelief. Simply stating the truth and receiving such a reaction made me feel like I had done something wrong. An awkward silence ensued. After a brief pause, she looked at me with a smile, as if to shake off the previous tension. She then began to reveal the true reason behind requesting the document from me. "To be honest, ever since my first day here, I've been astounded by your work ethic, Bob. Given your age and the quality of your work, it wouldn't be surprising if you were making at our headquarters. I always wondered why. Hence, to gauge your capabilities, I had you work on this intricate document. From what I've heard, Bob, you left your previous job, joined this company midway, and have been in a low-profile position for over a decade. Don't you ever want to climb the corporate ladder?" When she said that to me, I wondered if other colleagues had the same doubts about me. But I wasn't too interested in things like promotions or fancy titles. When I mentioned this, she laughed and said, "You're an interesting guy." From that day on, the difficulty of the tasks given to me increased dramatically. And later on, she asked me to accompany her to a meeting at the headquarters. Although reluctant, I agreed and headed to the headquarters. It was my first visit to the headquarters since my mid-career interview, and I was a bit nervous. The meeting was about an upcoming business book for young people. Before the meeting started, I had thought I'd just attend and not voice my opinions, but once it began, I couldn't suppress my thoughts. Before I knew it, I was suggesting various ideas, and most of the employees at the headquarters nodded in agreement, their faces showing astonishment. The CEO was also present, and after the meeting, I was called into his office. I went with Catherine. "Well, Catherine was right. You're really talented, Bob. We shouldn't let talent like yours go to waste. I'd really like you to join our editorial team at the headquarters and fully utilize your abilities." Taken aback by this sudden offer, I said, "Me, really?" The CEO cut me off, covering my hands with his own, and firmly said, "I'm counting on you." I still wanted to decline, but I felt I couldn't let down the CEO with the expectation he poured into that handshake. I murmured to myself, "I'll give it my best shot," and then replied, "Understood." I was transferred to the editorial department shortly after. When Catherine was transferred from the headquarters to my previous office, everyone was wondering why such a competent person was transferred, but this time, the looks I received were the exact opposite, cold and skeptical. "This old guy is getting transferred to the headquarters now. Wasn't he just a regular office worker all this time? Is he up for it?" When I first transferred, I often heard such comments. But I couldn't let that get me down. I had to deliver results here, to meet the expectations of the CEO and Catherine. From then on, I worked tirelessly, paying no mind to the stares and whispers. The hard work paid off. Eventually, even the employees who had once looked down on me began to recognize my contributions. The sense of fulfillment in this environment was something I never experienced in my previous position. I have grown fond of this workplace. One day, after getting used to my role at the headquarters, I was having lunch at my desk. While eating lunch at my desk, I got an email from Catherine. "Want to go out for drinks after work today?" Thinking about it, since I transferred to the headquarters, I hadn't really hung out with Catherine outside of official meetings. I owe her a lot for how far I've come, so I thought it'd be good to go as a way of saying thanks. When I arrived at the designated bar, Catherine had already started drinking. Catherine noticed me and waved her hand with a relaxed expression that she would not show at work. "I've heard from the CEO and some folks at the office. Sounds like you're doing great, Bob." "Well, not really. I'm just finally getting used to the job and the office vibe. It's been busy every day." After giving each other an update, she asked, "Can I ask you one question?" She asked with a slightly different, more serious look in her eyes than before. I didn't say anything but just nodded in response. "Why were you, Bob, who is so talented, settled in such a backbench position?" Being a lightweight drinker, I was already tipsy after only drinking half a mug of beer. Maybe because of that, I started sharing a story I'd never told any of my colleagues before. I actually graduated from Harvard, but on the resume I submitted to this company, I listed a different university. I couldn't see her face, but I could guess she probably had the same shocked expression she showed when she managed to understand a challenging document in a short time. Ignoring her reaction, I continued my story. In my previous company, which was over a decade ago, I was brimming with enthusiasm from the get-go. I wanted to climb the corporate ladder and be among the elites. Not only did I have the ambition, but I was also one of the top performers among my peers. For a while, my colleagues were just as driven as I was. Every day was competitive and challenging, but it felt fulfilling. However, at some point, jealousy began to seep in from my peers. Before I knew it, they'd say things like, "Of course, he can do it. He's a Harvard grad," and I found myself taking on their work as if they were pushing it onto me out of spite. Gradually, the mental pressure took its toll, and I fell into depression. The next thing I knew, I had quit my job. People had such high expectations because of my Harvard background, thinking I could handle anything. I began to wonder if it was better to pretend to be less competent to avoid the extra stress. That's why I hid the fact that I was a Harvard grad and lied on my resume. Once I finished my story, I looked over at her. She seemed more engaged than I had expected, and I felt reassured. "That sounds tough. I kind of get it now." Well, honestly, pretending to be incompetent and being a sidelined employee at this company was easy at first. But if I hadn't met you, I might have just coasted until retirement without ever feeling this fulfilled. While I initially felt out of place when I transferred to our headquarters, now I really enjoy working with my colleagues and the environment. I owe a lot to you, Catherine. I can't thank you enough. Expressing my gratitude was a big reason I came here today, so being able to convey it made me feel refreshed. As for her, she looked a bit bashful and humbly said, "Oh, please, I didn't do much," though her expression hinted she appreciated the compliment. We chatted for a bit longer before she suddenly remembered, "Oh, right. I invited you here today because there's someone I want you to meet, Bob." Apparently, this individual is a professor, also a Harvard grad like me. I heard that he is a well-known professor in the publishing world, and that books written by him are sure to become bestsellers. He can be a bit stubborn and difficult, but maybe he'll listen if it's you, Bob. A few days later, Catherine and I went to meet the professor. "Hello," Catherine greeted as she opened the door. The professor, seated and engrossed in a newspaper, looked up with an exasperated expression and said, "You again. I have someone I'd like to introduce today." Saying this, Catherine gave me a strong push from behind to prompt me forward. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Bob from TZ Publishing." Despite Bob being a Harvard grad, he listed a different college on his resume and was sidelined at his job until recently. Her spilling the beans about my past right off the bat made me bow my head in surprise and embarrassment. However, the professor's reaction was unexpected. "Now, isn't that intriguing?" he remarked, breaking into a cheerful laugh. "Well, let's at least hear what you have to say. You came to discuss publishing, didn't you?" I had been on guard because Catherine had warned me about his stubborn and difficult nature, but now that the ice was broken, I felt relieved. Prompted by the professor, Catherine and I took seats across the table from him. I was anxious about the possibility of him diving into technical topics I wouldn't be able to answer. However, our conversation remained casual. We chatted about me, about Catherine, and touched a bit on the publishing industry, losing track of time. It was evident the professor had warmed up to me. "Man, Bob, you're not only entertaining, but also sharp. If you'd be the lead editor, I'd consider publishing with your agency." "Really?" "Yes. But if we're doing this, we're aiming for a bestseller. I don't want to compromise on the content, so give it your all, Bob. I'm counting on you." And with that, I had won his favor, and, just as Catherine had hoped, we got to discuss publishing. "We did it, Bob. With your persuasion, even that stubborn professor was moved." I modestly replied, "It wasn't all me. I didn't do much, but deep down, I was ecstatic like never before. I couldn't believe I'd have the chance to work with such an esteemed individual like the professor in my life. The thought alone made me look forward to each new day." The business book for young adults that the professor and I collaborated on was a massive success. I was convinced that, with the professor, we could produce future classics, and so I delved even deeper into my work. That effort was never in vain. The books the professor and I released kept hitting the bestseller list, and my presence in the editorial department had grown immensely compared to before. And when I say it had grown, I don't just mean in terms of prominence. The sense of fulfillment I felt, something I would never have experienced in my previous job or back when I was just another face in the crowd, was incomparable to the past. Later on, my relationship with Catherine evolved from work colleagues to dating. Now, we're married and have been blessed with a beautiful daughter. My life, which was once set on coasting through average days until retirement, underwent a significant transformation after meeting Catherine and the professor. I hated my job because of my excellence, and at one point I even gave up my hard-earned title of Harvard grad. However, I was able to change thanks to encounters with people who could be described as fate. I was just lucky to have a fateful encounter, but when I see someone wanting to change their situation now, I want to tell them this. Don't fear change. Take action. Just waiting for an opportunity might mean you only get your chance after turning 40, or perhaps you might never find it in your lifetime. While 40 isn't too late, it's always better to grab chances sooner. If you seize opportunities early, you can enjoy longer and more fulfilling days. To those who are content with their current state, I'd like to ask, is that truly the best you can do? Thanks to the professor, there's no denying that I've become known as an editor with a string of bestsellers. But since the day the professor told me he liked my work, I've poured my heart and soul into my job day and night. I can proudly say that this hard work, while modest, has definitely contributed to the success of those bestsellers. Because with each book, I've given it my all. So, take a moment to reflect if your current situation is truly the result of giving your very best, and if you feel there's more you can achieve, that you are not at your limit, then I urge you to act now. Effort is always rewarded in one way or another. If my life, where I even falsified my education to become a sidelined employee, can change so drastically from just a few encounters, so can yours.